Bring your friends and your folks along down to the river and sing this song.
RiverFest, it's the best.
I'm Jackie Bradham, and I'm on the RiverFest committee, and I'm also on the secretary for the Hudson Grocery Co-op. And today we're going to have a foraging lesson with Russ Lake, and hopefully learn a little bit about some edible plants. The Hudson Grocery Co-op is trying to establish a grocery store in Hudson, Wisconsin. And I think that's about it.
And I'm Russ Lake, and I live here in Hudson, and I am an avid amateur forager. And Hudson Grocery has asked me to do a little tour of my garden today. And so we're going to start out by looking at some common plants that you might have in your garden already. You may have planted them, or they may have existed before, or invaded your garden. We'll look at those, and then we'll also try to look at some of the wild plants and wild invasive plants that might be in your garden that you can actually eat and are quite nutritious and delicious. So let's get started. All right, well, here you see a beautiful spiderwort plant. And it's in the genus Tradescantia, and the blooms are edible, and the leaves and stems are also edible. You always look for the most tender part and don't eat the part that doesn't break, what's called the meristem. So you tip it until it's ready to break and then snap off, and then that's the edible part. They are in bloom right now. They open up during the daytime, close up in the evening. Gorgeous, and you may have these in your garden already. Then moving right along, we have the oxeye daisy. The oxeye daisy is a really common in people's gardens. It invades. People tend to pull them up if they don't enjoy the flowers. I enjoy the flowers quite a bit, but the little leaves that are in the oxeye daisy have a very unusual flavor. It's hard to describe, so I won't even try to describe it, but it's delicious and is a really nice addition to a salad, but can also be used as a cooked green as well. And then we'll move on to the next plant we're going to look at, which is goutweed, or also called bishopweed. This is very common in people's gardens, and you may recognize the two different varieties. One has I guess it might be considered variegated, and then the other one green. I have both. It's in the celery family, or the carrot family. Here is a flowering stalk, which isn't the part that we would eat, but we would eat the tender shoots coming up with the leaves, and it's very celery-like. I don't know, Jackie, if you'd have another description for it.
Yeah, it's very celery, and then it has a little bit of an aftertaste, so it kind of has like a double flavor, and both of which are nice and not bitter like a dandelion. I could see that being a celery substitute very easily. Yeah.
If you're familiar with the dish spanakopita, which is spinach pita, or spinach pie, you may not be familiar with the more traditional Greek version of that pie or pita, which is hortopita. And hortopita would include a whole Mediterranean mix of any mixed greens that you might put in that spinach pie, or that pie, that pita. And this is excellent as a hortopita, as an ingredient in hortopita. So bishop's weed or goutweed, delicious. Here's a plant that you might have in your garden. This is a cultivated version, but there's a wild version that grows in our area. It's Rudbeckia laciniata, which is also called the cutleaf coneflower, and is also known by the Cherokee people as Sochan or Sochan. This is the cultivated version. I think it's called Golden Globe, but it tastes essentially the same as the wild. So in order to consume this, you just, again, find the meristem, where the part where the stem will snap off easily. Let's try a different one. There we go. And then pull that off, and you can chop that up and finely and throw it in a salad or cook it as a cooked vegetable. It was one of the ingredients in my breakfast this morning. I had about 7 different plants in my breakfast this morning, and it's again a delicious green. It has a very, again, celery-like, but better than celery, much better than celery. Celery, parsley, very fresh flavor. So shan. Okay, we're going to look at a couple of different plants here that are still in their edible stage. One is Campanella rapunculase, or otherwise known as the creeping bellflower. Creeping bellflower, you'll see those in your garden. You'll say, oh, I'm so sick of those blue flowers, but they're beautiful blue flower, and they're a beautiful plant, and you don't have to plant them. They'll just keep coming back. But it's a delicious garden vegetable. In the spring and in the fall, it produces a delicious starchy white taproot that you can pull up, and this time of year you can eat the greens. So if you find the small ones, small tender greens, you can collect those. Later on they'll get tall and they'll produce their inflorescence of blue flowers, and then those will topple over and creep. So the creeping bellflower is another delicious plant that most people have access to in their gardens. And let's just move on to this next one. If you're a pollinator fiend like I am, you planted a pollinator garden and you're encouraging lots of different insects that would pollinate your garden, and you're interested in monarch butterflies, the common milkweed is a good plant to have in your garden. But it's also an edible plant, so there are several different edible stages. One is the shoot stage as it's coming up, which it can be confused with common dogbane, so making sure you have positive identification is important. Although I would say the common dogbane is bitter. It has a bitter alkaloid in it, and the milkweed does not. And so at this stage, so this isn't the shoot stage anymore, but you could certainly harvest the top leaves of this. And then many of the milkweeds right now have a flower that looks a bit like, that's starting to look like a piece of broccoli. Those are also edible. Later on it'll have pink flowers. Those are also edible, but not as interesting in my opinion, but certainly good. And then later it'll have pods, and the immature pods, if you collect them early enough and are able to just take your thumbnail and push into the white immature seeds, and they'll cut with your thumbnail, then they're still edible, and they taste. Sam Thayer calls those milk whites, and has actually put them on pizza and said it behaves a little bit like cheese. So milkweed has many different stages, and because it propagates through its stolons and not as often with seeds and things like that, I think it's reasonable to harvest small amounts in large populations and not have any negative effect on pollinators like the monarch caterpillar. Here's another plant that's ubiquitous in most people's gardens, and that's the violet. There are many different types of violet in the genus Viola, and violets start coming up earlier in the season and have a slightly bitter flavor to them, but are highly nutritious garden vegetables. You can see there's a lot of variability in the size of the leaves. But if you have violets and you're trying to get rid of some of them, or any of these other plants that you consider to be weeds, then why not eat them out of existence if you must? Violets, part of my breakfast also this morning. All right, so we left this pot out with some dirt in it, which many people do. We have pots sitting with dirt in them. And look what came up in this pot. This is purslane, which is Portulaca oleracea. And purslane is a succulent little plant. It grows well in dry conditions. It's invasive. I think it's originally from Pakistan or India. In the morning, it tends to have a lot of malic acid in it as part of its strategy for surviving dryness. And it's a delicious little and nutritious little raw or cooked vegetable. And it's, as far as I know, it has the highest amount of plant-sourced omega-3 fatty acids of any other plant. And if you get the right one with the right soil conditions and the right time of day, it has a little bit of a lemony-like flavor. It's delicious. I've used this. It can get quite large with quite succulent, almost like jade plant, like thick stems. And it's great chopped up in a Greek, like a Greek yogurt salad with tomatoes and things of that sort, highlighting the Greek culinary tradition here today. But however you like to cook your greens or eat your greens, purslane is a delicious and nutritious vegetable. This sour little plant that I'm giraffing on right now is a wild grape, or a river grape. And it not only has delicious little sour tendrils, which my daughter loves to consume, and it's also highly invasive in our gardens around here, but it has really nice leaves for making, that you can use it as a vegetable, but you can also make, again, traditional Greek or Middle Eastern dish called domates, which I've made in the past. I haven't made recently, but I've made in the past. And so if you find some particularly large ones, this is on the small side, but if you find particularly large ones, this one's a little larger, you can steam them or simmer them in a bit of salt water, a whole stack of them, until they get tender, and then you could make up a rice pilaf or something, or a meat type, seasoned meat type thing, and then you can roll these up into domates like little burritos. The other great thing about wild grapes, and I'm hoping to get a good harvest this year, is you'll notice that these are starting to fruit. And the fruit of wild grapes, wild grape juice, is like nothing else. It's just so intense and amazing and makes good wine and jelly and things of that sort. One thing is very high in tartaric acid or tartrate, which grapes are in general have that, but wild grapes in particular have very high concentrations. So when you juice them, you put the juice in the refrigerator overnight, and then the tartrate will filter out, and you'll see this sort of grayish white mass on the top, and then you just carefully pour the juice, the clean juice off the top, the grape juice off the top, and then you can use it however you'd like. You can freeze it as juice, make jellies, jams, or wine out of it. It makes an excellent, very tart and amazing wine. So wild grapes, river grape, Vitis riparia. So here we have wild strawberries. The previous owner planted these as well. I believe they're Fragaria vesca, although in Sam Thayer's book he talks about them, that particular species being distinguished from Virginiana as having the seeds on the outside of the fruit and it being somewhat elongated. So I'm not sure what variety I have here or if I have some sort of hybrid of something, but wild strawberries come up. These are not the most delicious strawberries, which is consistent with Vesca, but they're pretty darn good. And they're a lot of fun to just pick and forage as a trail nibble during the summer, this time of year. So wild strawberries. Here's another fun plant that you probably have seen if you don't have it in your garden, and this is the Columbine, the wild Columbine. It produces these beautiful little flowers and sometimes can have huge Columbine plants. This one's been picked over by my daughter a bit, but the flowers are great in salads and they're great just as a trail nibble. They have almost like a sweet nectar in the little ends. I don't know if you can see the little globed ends on them, but it's a sweet little nectar and can be added whole to a salad or picked apart and spread out They're really yummy. Wild Columbine. Many people have this plant growing in their gardens. It's a smartweed, and the smartweeds are all edible. There's some really large ones that grow down by the river, down by the public beach. Some of the smartweeds, this has a little watermark on it, or a little almost bruised-like looking mark on it, and they don't all have that, and as they get older, sometimes that changes. But some smartweeds they're delicious cooked vegetable, but some of them actually have a peppery flavor. And I actually, one of the award-winning dishes that was prepared a few years ago at the Midwest Wild Harvest Festival had a peppery smartweed in it as part of the ingredient. This one is not peppery, but sometimes there's an aftertaste that catches up with you. But here is a very peppery plant that grows. It's an invasive plant also, but grows around here. I collected the seeds down by the river, down on that, is it the dike? I collected the seeds and then I just spread them because there are thousands per plant. This is black mustard, Brassica nigra, and it has a deliciously peppery green leaf. If you cook it, the peppery flavor goes away, but it's quite spicy right now. It's already hitting my tongue. Quite spicy. Here's what the flower looks like. But as these plants grow, they'll get enormous and they'll produce thousands and thousands of seeds. And it's a member of the cruciferous family: broccoli, kale, Brussels sprouts, cabbage. It's in that same family. And those cruciferous vegetables are unique because they have glucosinolates in them that have anti-cancer properties and lots of other health promoting properties which we don't have time to go into, but they're delicious. So including cruciferous vegetables and mustards in your family, mustard families, including the mustards family in your family diet is a very healthful thing to do. Delicious and healthful. Black mustard. This plant, it's also very common in people's yards and gardens. And it's not really an edible plant. We don't think of it as an edible plant, but it's in the mint family, has a square stem and opposite leaves. And cats really love it. They kind of go crazy for it. This is catnip. Makes a good tea. Some people report that consuming the tea at night helps them relax, calm them down before sleep. So catnip, it's just here, so we'll talk about it. So there it is. So there are a few other plants around the back of the garden in the alley that we can look at for their edibility. You always have to make a judgment about where you collect your plants. Are you collecting them, if you're collecting them in ditches and by the edges of roadsides, there could be pesticides and things like that. So keep that in mind when you're collecting. There are also people who water their dogs and cats and animals. So just being aware of that is really important. I probably wouldn't eat these next plants where they are, but I definitely eat them in general when I find them in better places, more appropriate places. But let's look at them. So the first one is a very common invasive plant called lamb's quarters. And lamb's quarters is in the Chenopodium, album. It's in the Chenopodium genus, which is this. If you look at cultivated plants, it's spinach. It's wild spinach. It's one of the wild spinaches. I have two wild spinaches in my garden. I have the non-native Chenopodium album, and I have the native maple leaf goosefoot, Chenopodium simplex. This plant blows away spinach nutritionally in calcium. So it has a much higher degree of calcium in it. And there are lots of other relatives in that genus and in related genuses that are delicious and nutritious and basically spinach-like. You can also eat the seeds later on. And the seeds are little black seeds, but you do have to try to get what's called a saponin or a saponins off of them, which is a soapy-like stuff, which is an anti-nutrient, which makes them harder to digest. But to compare it, a more familiar seed that would be harvested that you may all be more familiar with is quinoa. And quinoa is in the same genus. It's called Chenopodium quinoa. So it's also one of the spinach relatives and has an edible seed as well as the plant itself. Amaranths are also closely related, and amaranth, maybe seen some of the cereals and breads and things like that that have amaranth seeds in them, very closely related. This plant next to it is Sonchus, and I would throw it into a lettuce category, but because it has some characteristics of lettuce. It's sow thistle is its common name, and it's good cooked. It's when the stem gets bigger, you can trim off the fibrous outer part of the stalk and eat the tender inside. It's a good vegetable to keep in mind, sow thistle. Hey, we're still in the alley. This plant, which really drives some of my neighbors crazy, is common burdock, not great burdock, but there are two species. It is an invasive plant as well. Most people seek out the taproot. If you've been in the grocery store and seen the vegetable gobo, a large white taproot, that's a commercially grown version of the burdock plant. It's very hard to get to the taproots in the fall and in the spring without breaking them off, and the best part is the part that breaks off and stays in the soil. But it's worth trying if you're interested in it. It's a vegetable that's high in inulin, and many root vegetables have inulin in them. And if you've ever consumed inulin that's not well cooked, you'll realize in a very gaseous, voluminous way that you've perhaps made a mistake in not cooking it longer. But gobo or burdock is one of those plants that's invasive and available in every roadside and in disturbed soils everywhere. The thing about burdock it's one of its protective responses is not to have prickly parts, but to have actual bitter parts. So if I actually just rub my finger across this burdock leaf and taste it, it's very bitter. So it discourages animals, herbivores, from choosing it as part of their meal. This burdock stock has started to put up quite a bit of branching. So I'm not going to try to harvest this one, but we'll go and look at one that we can that'll be great. There's another one of these smartweeds right here as well. So let's head on down this way and we'll find, there's one in my neighbor's yard, which I know they won't be bothered if I harvest. Okay, so here are a couple of burdocks here. So I'm going to go down into the second year stem. It's a perennial plant, and this time of year they're taking all those nutrients, all that energy from the root, the taproot, and it's now being put up into that second year stalk, which is just going to grow to be enormous, and then put out its seeds and propagate itself. But right now, as this stalk is starting to come up, and it's still tender, I can go down really low toward the bottom of it and cut into the stalk. And as long as there's not a hollow spot, which shows that it's too old, which this one doesn't have, but that one may have, I can now strip some of these leaf petioles off, and I can peel this back, and it's going to have a wonderful succulent core to it in the stem. But I'd also like to just point out, so this is the difference between great burdock and, which is Arctium, slipping my mind, the species name. But anyway, great burdock and common burdock. So this is common burdock. And the reason I know is it actually has a hollow petiole. That's one way of determining the two. And it's also probably just more common burdock, right? Arctium minus and Arctium lapa. So minus, I think minus is common burdock, and that's the one we're looking at. So I'm going to start to peel back some of these. Oh, also this thing with these petioles, you'll see it's kind of looks a lot like a piece of celery. So I'll cut through this. Looks a lot like a piece of celery. Has this groove in it, and it's bitter because all parts of this plant, except for the root and the inside of the stalk, are bitter. But you can still cut it up into small celery-like pieces and throw it into stir fry, and maybe even just strip some of the little fibrous bits off of the outside of it, which are also going to contain some of the bitter parts, and then you can cook that up like a piece of celery. Won't be quite the same as celery, but it's still good. A little bit. So right now I'm just going to peel these back real quickly, and just so you can get a look at. So I'm going to go in here, and I can take this and peel back the fibrous parts. Get down here. I can stable myself so I don't cut my thumb. And then if I need to, I can strip off additional fibrous material like this if the peeling didn't go as well. And so all the way up the stem is going to be tender, very succulent, full of fluid, full of juice. Shoot vegetable, common burdock. So here we are, still out in the alley near the garbage cans. And here's my neighbor's garbage can. And here is another one of those Chenopodium wild spinaches. And this is a native maple leaf goosefoot. And I spread a bunch of seeds back here a few years ago, and now I get a few of these plants every year. They have one of the larger of the wild seeds. So if you're collecting seeds like you would a quinoa plant or an amaranth plant, then this is a good one to let go to seed, but doesn't mean you can't still eat some leaves off of it. Or if you have a whole bunch of maple leaf goosefoot plants, you can certainly spare some for vegetables during the vegetable season and then collect some seeds in the end, because again, it's a prolific seed producer, producing thousands and thousands of seeds per plant.
Russ, can you tell us what this one is? It's interesting.
Sure, as best I can. So this is, I believe, Rumex crispus, which is commonly called curly dock or yellow dock. And there are several different varieties of dock that grow. The ones that I found the most delicious when they're coming up as a shoot early in the season is patience dock, which is also an invasive plant. But it has large leaves. There are a bunch that are growing down the alley in this direction, a few blocks down. Large leaves, and then you put a big seed head later on. And so this is what the seed head looks like. It's in the buckwheat family. And these little seeds are also reported to be edible. So if you let this go to seed, and then, but I think you'd find as you taste the seeds, they are, and you remove them from little fruits, you would find that they would be quite astringent. Like you wouldn't be able to use very many in whatever you were making without making it taste absolutely terrible. But a few years ago, I took up a challenge to try to find out a way to, I was treating the astringency as if it was like an acorn bitterness, an acorn tannin. And so I tried some different things. I tried boiling them, or I tried using an alkali solution, like some lye, to see if I could remove that tannin, and that didn't seem to help as much. But when I boiled them, it turned the water purple, and then I boiled them again, and again, just brought them to simmer until the water turned purple. The purple tannins or astringent properties leached off into the water, and then it became a very mild little seed, and quite good. I mean, nothing super distinctive about the flavor, but certainly edible and could be ground into flour or eaten in a porridge. So you can eat the seeds if you leach off the astringent properties. Interestingly, we have rhubarb sitting right next to it. So if you looked closely at these seeds, you notice that this is a giant version of this seed, which also indicates that this is in the buckwheat family as well. And I've never tried eating these seeds, but that might be an interesting next thing to try. I don't recommend that you do it though.
So in the
but
fall,
anyway, so the curly dock is, you could probably still eat these, but they start to get very sour, and They might be all right if you cooked them, but better to get the shoot when it's just coming up. And the patient stock is the species that's the most delicious.
These
in my
get
opinion.
really pretty rust color in the fall.
Yeah,
don't they?
these will get very rusty brown color. You'll see them in ditches driving in and out of the Twin Cities and around different areas, big clusters of them. So if a person had a mind to, and you wanted to collect a staple seed, if you were trying to live a little bit off of the food that you were gathering, you could certainly gather a lot of these. Again, you'd have to treat them though, just like you would an acorn.
An acorn, and there are some plants out there that you need to
Absolutely.
Get the tannins off or get the acids off
Yeah,
before you eat them.
Absolutely. In order to make many foods edible, you have to
And I'm
do
look-
some sort of processing.
I'm looking at the
Wild rice is a
seed.
good example.
Yeah, this seed is about an 1/8 inch large. It's got a hull on it. I'm going, it would take you forever to seed all to hull all those. You'd have to do them like winnowing wheat or whatever after they dried out.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah.
So we also have these back here.
Oh, yeah.
The
So daylilies.
daylilies.
The daylily has a bulb that is edible, allegedly. I haven't tried it, and also the early shoots that are coming up can be eaten, and the flowers. I used to cook the flowers because my wife really liked them, and I cooked them with eggs. They're big orange flowers. I'm sure people have seen them. Not all lilies are edible, however, but wild daylilies are. I would caution people because some people have, and I'm one of them, can have severe intestinal problems after eating them, and spend hours off and on in the bathroom with great urgency to get there in time. It's not painful, but it's urgent. So Jackie asked me to point out a couple of plants that aren't in season right now, but you might be interested in when the spring rolls around next year. So one is the ostrich fern. So I don't have an example of the fertile frond from the ostrich fern, but it's a good way to identify the fern in the spring as it's coming up as a shoot vegetable, as a shoot. It doesn't necessarily want to be a vegetable, but it has a very ostrich-like, feather-like frond. So look up these things. You always have to do your own due diligence in positively identifying a plant before you consider consuming it. So using multiple references, books, take a class. We have local experts here like Sam Thayer, which are so valuable I can't even begin to tell you. But anyway, the ostrich fern can grow. When it comes up, it's identifiable because it will have a V-like groove in the stem, on the inside of the stem. Each stem will have a V-like groove. It'll be smooth, but as it's unfurling its frond, it has little paper husky-like things on the frond or on the fiddlehead. So that's one way to identify it. It doesn't have any little hairy legs or anything like that. But you can spend some time learning about ferns because not all ferns are edible, and some actually have very powerful carcinogens in them if they're not cooked or processed in different ways. So definitely do your homework on the ferns, but always do your homework on all plants, all wild plants. I just noticed here also, we had talked about earlier about grape leaves having a different, wild grape leaves, whoops, I'm losing my microphone, having a different shape, so this is one of those. Another thing that Jackie asked me to talk about was hostas, and they're not in season right now either, but I have many different varieties of hostas, and hostas are an edible plant. They may have been brought over here originally for edibility, I don't know, not just an ornamental, but they're beautiful, and often people have to divide them anyway, like many of these plants, these garden plants. So when they come up in the spring and they're all wrapped up in a shoot, you can, before they start to unfurl their leaves, you can cut those off and cook them like asparagus, salt and pepper, butter, garlic, whatever, however you like to have your asparagus. And they're a delicious spring vegetable, hostas, and all varieties are edible. So the last plants we'll talk about today is in the genus Oxalis, and it is one of our common wood sorrels. Now wood sorrels, you might think, many people have looked at this and thought, well, that's a clover, isn't it? It's different from a clover. Clovers have a more rounded leaf, and the Oxalis, which is the shamrock shape, has a heart-shaped leaf on it. And I don't know if you can see that heart-shaped leaf. They're a little wilted back right now. Have this pretty little yellow flower, and they produce little, almost like tiny little okra-shaped seed pods, which are very lemony flavored. And the leaf itself, the plant itself, also has that little bit of that sharp lemony flavor, and it's good seasoning in salads, or thrown into salads as a seasoning. But one of my favorite things that I've tried with these wood sorrels is, I believe Leda Meredith, was her idea, or it was Ellen Zakos, would take the leaves off the stems and saute them in butter. Not saute them, actually just melt them, or saute them a little bit and then melt butter into them, and then freeze the butter into little ice cube trays, and it would make a lemon flavored butter that they could use later on, take out little bits at a time and use to cook other vegetables in, or to spread on things. And so very, very nice flavor added to butter.
So I'm Jackie Bradham again here from the Hudson Grocery Co-op and the RiverFest Committee. And a big thank you, Russ, for helping us today.
Glad to do it.
We really enjoyed learning about some of these edibles right here in our backyard. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about these books here.
Sure. And I'm Russ Lake again. Thanks so much for going on this garden walk with us. It was a pleasure to do it. I want everybody to consider that when you walk around your own yard or around your own community, hopefully you'll notice some of these things, and there are certainly more things in your garden than we've even looked at today that are probably edible and worth exploring. And even if you don't want to eat them, or they're not edible, and try to enjoy them for what they are, and because there are many beautiful plants. I don't like to use the word weed, because weed suggests something negative about a plant, and there are really, in my estimation, no weeds. But you have to pick and choose what you want, of course, in your garden. So no worries there. But enjoy what you have. I've got a few reference books if you're interested in foraging, and these are some go-to books. They're certainly not my whole library, but these are the ones I would go to first. I would go to anything by Sam Thayer. Sam is from northern Wisconsin, and he is a brilliant forager and on many topics, and his books are just outstanding. The Forager's Harvest is his first one. Nature's Garden, I have a photo credit in there. Incredible Wild Edibles is his last one. And then this other book on the end by Jackie is called Backyard Foraging by Ellen Zakos. And Ellen is another friend who from out east who has written a book that includes many garden vegetables, like some of the vegetables we looked at today that may be common ones that you've planted or existed in your yard before that aren't technically weeds. So that's a terrific book for that. And then I would go down to Leda Meredith's Northeast Foraging in Northeast. We're not in the Northeast, but it's going to cover some of these same plants. And then Edible Wild Plants by John Kalis. And the reason similar situation where a lot of those same plants may be covered in these books, but John Kalis's book includes, he's a nutritionist by training, I believe, and he actually has included some nutritional information that's been researched in his book, and so I like that book for that information as well. So thanks so much again for going on a walk with us, and happy foraging from the Hudson Grocery Co-op.
And from RiverFest. Thank you.
And from RiverFest.
Now bring your friends and your folks along.